Thank you for tuning in to another episode of InRange. I'm bringing something to you that I've actually been waiting almost a year to do, and I'm very excited about. On InRange, we started experimenting with red dot sighted pistols quite a while ago, and if you've been a long-time InRange viewer, you've seen us using this configuration for a while. This was inspired by the Roland Special, but it is not specifically a Roland Special. It's a Glock 19 with a grip frame reduction by We Plead II. This is a KE Arms KE19 slide cut for the Loophole Delta Point Pro red dot sight. Has a Faxon match grade barrel and a 2-port muzzle brake. Initially, the Roland Special always had an RMR on it, and we tried to use the RMR, both myself and Sinister Rifleman and Ian, and all of us suffered really catastrophic malfunctions with them. We had issues with them failing in the field, battery connection issues, as well as having to take the unit on and off to change the battery. Now, that being said, you don't have to change the battery that often, but other things happen as well where it got dropped and damaged and failed, even in just competition environments. And while the RMR-1 has been improved with the RMR-2, at that point we decided to not use the RMR and went with the Loophole Delta Point Pro, with which we've had really no issues with. The battery is interchangeable while it is mounted to the slide. It is armored up, and we've had no durability issues with it. It's actually quite worn and beat up at this point, and it's never had a battery contact failure. Now, I've heard from Chuck Pressburg, who originated the concept of the Roland Special, that the RMR does much better in rain environments, and that the RMR-2 is a significant improvement over the RMR-1, and that the Delta Point suffers in wet environments. This has not been an issue for me. For the most part, I'm not shooting in the rain here in Arizona, and the Delta Point has served us well. We did go with backup iron sights. We have a suppressor front sight, and the Loophole has a built-in integral rear iron sight. And before you say something about, but you guys say you don't need iron sights, we're talking about on rifles. When it comes to a red dot sighted pistol, you actually use the iron sights for your initial sight picture, at least I do, especially in practical shooting environments and awkward positions, and then transition to the dot, because it's hard to reference where the dot is without many repetitions of presentations, and then presentations change when you're rollover prone under a car or a barricade, and then you lose the dot again. So having iron sights on a red dot sighted pistol can be very useful in unorthodox shooting positions to find the dot, especially with this type of heads-up display reflex type sight where the emitter is here in the unit and there's a piece of glass here, and then that dot is projected onto the glass. There's not a lot of reference for you in that regard. And this is one of the issues that's been ongoing with red dot sighted pistols, is they're all this style of red dot optic. There's an emitter here, piece of glass, it's transmitted onto that. If anything gets in here, water, dirt, debris, it can block the emitter and therefore not even give you a dot, or you can get fogging situations, as well as this little glass here acts like a big old spoon and scoop in dirty environments where, like, you're crawling through the dirt or whatever. Unless your holster is completely sealed or the gun is out because you're using it, this can fill up with dirt and debris, and that can be a significant problem. Well, in that regard, about a year ago, I guess now, or maybe it was over a year ago, I'm not even sure, at SHOT Show, Aimpoint announced the ACRO, and we finally have an ACRO. And I am of the mindset that there's a very good chance that the ACRO is going to be the solution to most, if not all, of these problems. It looks a little bigger than what we're using here with the Delta Point, but honestly, in overall platform size, it's not. Like, if you look at the Delta Point, this part is not here because it is this type of style sight, but when you put the ACRO, it's really the same sight. So sight size, there's a little bit more mass here, but once you already have this protruding from the slide of the gun, adding it back and then turning it into an enclosed tube-like red dot does not really change the overall size of the gun dramatically in any way, shape, or form, in my opinion, but we'll find that out as we use it. So we finally got our ACRO, and I'm going to walk you through right now installing an ACRO onto a slide, and then we're going to zero it, and then you're going to get some timed environment stuff here at the end with first impressions of using the ACRO on the clock. All right, so we've got all our goodies here. This is the box that the ACRO came in. Comes with a battery, which we'll install later, and a standard little Aimpoint tool. This is cool for all Aimpoint thingamajigs. And as you can see, it's purposely designed to fit the mounting screw. And this is what I was talking about. You just loosen this up. This is such a difference from previous red dot sight type situations. And then just slide this on as you would an optic, like on a rifle, and then just tighten it up. And boom, we have already installed our red dot sight on this slide. That is a huge improvement over the previous iterations, in my opinion, to both take on and off. On the right side here is our windage, and up here is elevation. Again, the same tool for that. Battery compartment, and as you can see, you can actually see through the dot sight and still use the backup irons, which is really cool. So we've got a co-witness here, and we'll have a dot in a moment, and that's it. That's all there is to it. So now we have to zero it. But let's go ahead and put the gun back together and take a look at it in its configured form. So again, we drop our barrel in, no big deal there. Standard Glock spring. And this slide is ready to go. And we've heard rumors about the battery life being contentious. And when I look at this data sheet here, the data sheet says that the CR1225 3-volt lithium battery has more than 1.5 years of use on setting 6, and more than 6 months of use on setting 7, and more than 8 years on the night vision settings of 1 to 4. Here in Arizona, I'm assuming we're going to be at setting 7 or even 8. It goes from 1 to 10. And I don't know what the battery life is like in that regard, but when you see that settings 6 is 1.5 years and setting 7 is 6 years, it pretty much cuts it in half from going to 6 to 7. So if I have to leave this on 8, maybe the battery life's only a couple months, and we've heard that sort of thing. But in terms of an administrative issue, it's not that big a deal to just change the battery out every month or two and just be cognizant and aware of it. But let's go ahead and get this out to the range and get this zeroed, and then get some time on the clock with it to get some general ideas about actually shooting the Aimpoint ACRO red dot sight. All right, so we're out here in the desert at the range. We're at 10 yards away from my steel target, and we're going to go ahead and zero the ACRO. I have got some magazine of ammunition, and I've got my zeroing tool. So what I'm going to do is fire at the big plate, and wherever the splash is, I'm just going to turn to move to where the splash hit, and then eventually we're going to shoot at the precision plate. But let's go ahead and fire the first round and see where we land up. Okay, we hit low and right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to raise this up. So for elevation, we're going to turn this counterclockwise. I don't really know how many clicks, I'm just kind of turning. And then we're going to go counterclockwise on, actually clockwise on this to make impact left. And let's see if that changes the splash a little bit. Holy mackerel, let me do another one. I think I'm there. I'm going to go to the plate at the top left. All right, well that was too easy. We're at 10 yards. We're going to move back to 20 yards. We're going to paint the target, move back to 20 yards and do the same thing. And at 20 yards, if I can keep that dot right in the middle, which is what I want, I tend to go 20 yards with red dots on pistols. That's my personal preference. We'll be done. So let's move back to 20 yards. All right, we've moved back to 20 yards. We've freshly painted the target. Let's see if we're centered up on it. All right, so windage is good. Elevation's a little low. So if I go back to this, once again, I want to move it up. So I'm going to go counterclockwise, but I'm just going to do a couple clicks. I tried 6 there. And let's go ahead and see if we move the elevation up. Not enough. I'm going to do a couple more. A little too much. That's fine. This is why I like using steel. It's very immediate. Just going to back it off a little bit, going clockwise. All right, here we go. That appears to be good. I'm going to go to the precision plate now. Still too high. I'm going to go back a little bit. All right, take a look. Windage is fine. We have nothing to do on windage at all. Done. Good enough for government work, and actually I'm hitting that precision plate at 20 yards. I'm not going to move it any more than this. I might fine tune it at the match if I feel like I'm a little on or off for a little bit, but at 20 yards hitting that precision plate means to me good enough for what I'm trying to do today. All right, so this is actually just one day after we got the rough zero on the Acro and came out here and shot my first match with it, although it was just one stage. That said, there's already some conclusions that I think I can make, and Sinister Rifleman here, Russell Fagan, also might have some input as well. My first time using the Acro, I'm going to say immediately that this is a much easier sight to use. When you bring it up, because it's in a tube, the reality is these backup irons are nice to have, but they're not necessary like they were with the previous Delta Point Pro, because the aperture sort of automatically aligns the dot in your field of view, but it is a different presentation.
Yeah, it is different than using the Delta Point Pro. So like the first time I shot this was on the clock right now, and I had to kind of shift my the way I'm angling the gun a bit to see through it.
So to explain that to the audience, when you come up like this to aim, after many iterations of using a Delta Point Pro, you know, like you have this, like, I hate the term, but muscle memory. When you bring the gun up, you just know where it needs to be, and that's a presentation. The presentation's a little bit different, the angles are slightly different, and when I brought this up, this is not inherently a problem with this. In fact, it's a benefit, but it took me just a second to find it, just because my presentation angle was different.
And I've actually gotten used to running mine without backup irons on it for match purposes.
Yes.
So looking through it is a bit different than looking through the Acro, but I think it's something you could easily master at home with presentations.
And I do think that if you were to practice with that, this will actually be inherently better over time.
Mm-hmm. The main thing about the Acro that appealed to me just looking at it when I first saw it is I've been using red dots on pistols for a long time. I first had an RMR on my Glock 34 back in 2010.
Yep.
And using it at the first major match that I had at was the Iron Man 3 gun. It had fine moon dust everywhere. Just having the pistol in the holster, the lens would act like a cup and it would accumulate.
Yep.
So back then I wanted a sealed optic.
Mm-hmm.
It would take almost 10 years for it to happen. So I'm glad to see the Acros on the market. The other thing from a manufacturing standpoint, you know, the fact that we mill these slides, the mini rail that's machined in there is a feature that's much more easily incorporated into any pistol design. Mm-hmm. Where with like the RMR or the Delta Point, you're potentially breaking into internal component areas of the pistol slide.
Well, you're drilling holes down into the slide just to have mounting screws. This does not require mounting screws down into the slide. This just dovetails on and then locks on from the side.
Right, and accordingly, I think that mounting system is going to be much more future applicable to other optic designs. You know, we've seen with the Aimpoint micro mounting pattern, how many aftermarket red dots use that now. You know, the Vortexes, the Hollow Suns, the SIGs, they all use that same mounting pattern. So Aimpoint kind of sets the standard in that regard, and I think they're going to set the standard with the Acro.
I think they are, and this means we're going to see competition in this regard. Pistols that could already come pre-cut with this type of dovetail system. And then this mounting system doesn't have to be proprietary to Aimpoint. Someone like, they might set the standard for the Acro, but now you might see competitors come out with other red dots that if you wanted to take off the Acro, put something else on, that mounting system just boop, screw it in, good to go.
Yeah, every other sight is very specific in the way it's milled. Now, recently, the Hollow Suns have been mirroring the RMR mounting pattern.
Yeah.
But pretty much everything else has very different mounting patterns. So when you commit to that mounting pattern, you're married to it unless you want to get a different slide later. I think this one's going to be a lot easier for other optics manufacturers to adapt sights to and for end users to swap them out in the future.
So in that regard, here's where I'm going to take this. This is only first match ever trying to use the gun. One, I went without using a brake. I'm going to say a brake does matter on a Glock 19. I've been using a brake for a long time, and I'm like, you know, how much does that brake help? And when I shot it today, I'm like, you know what? The brake helps. So I'm going to go back to having a brake on this gun, but you have to try stuff like this once in a while. But in regards to the Acro, I think the Acro is a phenomenal move forward. I think it's sad that it took this long for the pistol red dot industry to come to a point where we have a sight developed with really this sort of durable, practical use in mind. It's not going to scoop dirt. You can literally just wipe it off. You have the ability to use it as an aperture. Even if the dot's off, you still got a tube to aim to, which is kind of interesting. You could actually use this as an aperture with the front sight post if you had to.
Well, and knowing that customers purchase these things in stages, very few people like have the disposable income to like get a new slide, get a new optic all at the same time.
Sure.
If you get the Acro cut slide, it doesn't look weird not having an optic on it. It's just like having a section of your AR upper that doesn't have an optic or a sight on it.
Just like having some open Picatinny rails.
Right.
So you could go incremental. You could get the slide, get the Acro later, enhance your gun over time.
The other thing we need to test is I do think that suppressor height sights probably aren't necessary with the Acro because of how low it sits. I think there are some taller sights on the normal end of the sight spectrum that would allow you to see through there, and then it's even more easy to take the sight off and shoot irons if you want to.
You know, now that you say that, when I look at the backup rear iron sight and the front suppressor height sight, I can actually aim all the way down to a third of the bottom of what's left of the front sight.
Right.
So you could probably have, like right now, you have essentially what you call a lower 1/3 co-witness. You could probably have like a lower 1/4 co-witness with rather standard height sights. But in that regard, you guys did a great job cutting the slide. I do want to say that Optics Planet provided the acro. We're waiting, gosh, practically a year for that. Real excited to have it. You're going to see a lot more content about this because I do believe this is the future of red dot sight pistols, and we've been doing it here on InRange for a long time. And I wanted to bring Single Store Rifleman on board because he's been doing it for longer than that.
I think in another 10 years, we're going to see him as standard equipment, just like red dots are standard equipment on rifles now. There's about a 20-year cycle on this stuff.
Yep.
I was in at the start of it. You know, when the RMR came out, there were earlier red dots. They were too fragile to even consider for real use.
They were.
But the RMR kind of set things off and set the industry in motion, moving towards a more durable optic. And this is definitely a big leap forward as far as features and durability.
I agree. So if you're interested in building something like this, you can get the slide from K Arms. We do have a discount code in the description below from Optics Planet, or if you just want anything else from Optics Planet, that code will work as well. Stay tuned for more interesting innovations in regards to red dot pistols and a lot more use of the acro in the near future on InRangeTV. Thanks for watching.